Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor-in-chief of Charter. We're here for the AI Educator webinar. I'm going to allow just about 30 seconds for a few more folks to come in. I'm here with Parker Mitchell, who's the CEO of Valence, and we're going to stand by for a moment and then get started. Parker, it's good to see you again while we're waiting. You're a globe-trotting person, one of the more globe-trotting people I know. While we're waiting for people to join us, what are the cities you've been in the last 2 or 3 weeks?
I think globetrotting has a glamorous connotation to it. When people ask me where I live, I jokingly reply the Marriott, um,
Yeah,
which is somewhat true. It is globetrotting without status on airlines is not a fun thing. I've
no,
been my most recent Europe trip was Dublin, London, Paris, Basel, Zurich, Zug, Frankfurt, and then back home. And right now, I am joining you from Chicago. Um,
great. Which
York-
is not your home, but is your home for the Marriott for the evening, apparently, the day.
so
Yeah, I noticed you don't have Southern Europe in there, Scandinavia, so maybe that's your next circuit there. So why don't we get started? So the Genesis, we appreciate every folks joining us. I think there's a lot to learn here from this conversation with Parker. The genesis of this is that Charter, and again, I'm Kevin Delaney, I'm the editor of Charter. We partnered with Valence earlier this year on a playbook called the AI Educator, using artificial intelligence to transform manager development, to really go in depth and look at how organizations were starting to use AI tools for coaching and training. And we decided to focus on managers specifically because it's an area of acute need at this point, and looked at what some of the researchers were saying about the best practices for using coaching and training and the capabilities that AI brings to that. So we partnered with Parker, who's the CEO of Valence, which is a company that uses AI for training and coaching leaders, but also any employees on their team. And the coach is called Nadia. And so you may hear more and more people talking about their coach, Nadia, as it's used by a range of companies. And we'll discuss more best practices and how some companies are using it. Parker, welcome. Thanks for carving out this time to talk this through. I think we just lost your audio there. Can you try it again?
sorry, Kevin,
So,
glad to be here.
okay, excellent. Good. I'm happy to hear that you're glad to be here. Let's talk about let's just dive right in. Can you situate us in terms of the context of the state of AI coaching? Like, what is the technology capable of today, and its use within organizations that you're talking to?
Let me break those two words up. So AI and coaching, and let me spend maybe a minute or two on sort of coaching and then a minute or two on AI.
Go
So
ahead.
if we think about sort of how we learn best, it is often through personalized learning. The research on education in schools shows that if you can provide a tutor-based approach to individualized learning for students, for children, they will learn twice as fast as if it is more of a teacher-based approach, which is sort of one size fits all. If you go to the world of performance sports, obviously people get individualized coaching, individualized support. They watch their own game tape. They get guidance on what they should do better, and that is obviously more effective than just sort of watching a YouTube video about what the best practice is. And so individualized learning in a range of settings is the most effective way. It is also the most expensive way.
Yeah.
And so it's never been able to scale. When we look at kind of the world of individual of learning within the work environment, individual executive coaches or individual team facilitators, that is, again, it's the gold standard. Everyone knows it works, and it's been too expensive. But sort of this world of, can we offer individualized support and learning across a range of skill buildings that we're all trying to do at work? I think that's sort of been the holy grail of talent teams who are looking to do learning and development and leadership support. So that's
And just so, well, before you continue, just like, so that looks like, for people who study in the UK elite university system, it looks more like you have a tutor and you meet with them and they talk you through things. And we'll maybe in a few minutes, we'll get to what the researchers say about the best practices for coaching and tutoring. But that is kind of individual attention personalized over time. So go ahead to the AI part.
absolutely. So the issue with that obviously is that like being able to personalize that at scale is challenging. On the AI side of things, we at Valence have been sort of trying to think about how we could provide this kind of more individualized support for our 6-year existence. We actually started with a mission that's not far from where we are now, which is the idea of a coach in everyone's pocket. We believed that eventually the technology would get there. But honestly, when we started, we thought it was a decade or two out. And we had a series of traditional, I would call them, sort of digital tools that allowed managers to learn more about their teams, that gave them what felt like individualized support to their context of what the challenges were. But it was more using traditional data science. It wasn't using language-based AI. But when the large language models first were being released, and it was something that, I actually did an undergrad in cognitive science, so I was sort of very aware of some of this back propagation, neural nets, and so I was sort of following along from a distance. When we saw what was possible and began experimenting even with a pre 3.5 version of it, what we saw wasn't the ability to generate. I imagine everyone here has had, gone into ChatGPT and done something super creative and gone, wow, no one I know could be as creative as this AI system. But what we saw was something a little different, and that was the promise of personalization. And the reason for that is AI, the generative AI, large language models understand language. And language is how most of us make sense of the world in our brains. We think through language, many of us. Our work is operating in language. It is conversations often mediated through, the digital world back and forth. And if we can have an LLM layer that is gradually trying to understand you and gradually trying to understand your work, that layer can start to personalize your experience. And so that idea there was we will be able to provide that kind of personalized coaching. And because it's software based, we're starting with managers. But my belief is that we are inevitably moving towards a world where each and every person is going to have a personalized coach that is going to get to know more about them, more about their business, and be able to support them at every moment of their career journey, potentially even prior to joining a company. They could have this, college or, various points sort of before that. So we are not quite there. Obviously, the technology, that idea of building in the memory layer, building in context, building in all that, there's work to be done on that. But I think if there's one thing that folks should take away, it is that I believe this future is inevitable, and it will utterly upend how we support leaders, managers, how we do change management, how we do cultural transformations, all that kind of work, because we'll be able to do this at scale.
Yeah. And so to summarize, what you're saying is that the advantages that AI offers is at the most basic is that it's able to personalize your coaching experience and do so and democratize it at the same time that it's doing that. Is that?
Yeah, so it's not there yet. Like when we talk about AI, it's sort of a fuzzy term. To me, it's sort of, we have a large language model, and most of the time we go to a ChatGPT type instance or Copilot, we ask a question, and sort of a single version of a large language model answers back. But imagine the large language model, there was a sort of collection of experts or a collection of, council of elders, and they all had a different point of view. They all brought that point of view to bear, and then they answered your question. It would feel the same as sort of going and having a conversation, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on. So most people haven't experienced that, but that's, I think, where the technology is going to evolve to.
That's where it's heading. Effectively, you have a sort of panel of coaches in the way that as a professional athlete, I might have a nutritionist and a sleep coach and a psychologist and that sort of thing who are providing inputs into to coach you. Is that right?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
good.
One of the things, so when we talked to some researchers for this playbook that we did together, Parker, they talked about apprenticeship as a model for thinking about coaching, and there's like pretty specific research on what makes apprenticeship effective. And so I wanted to talk about that for a minute and how uh, you're using AI to work in these different things. And so classic model of apprenticeship is you have modeling, so the AI might, or sorry, the expert might demonstrate a skill. There's coaching. The novice attempts the skill, and then the expert offers guidance and feedback, and then scaffolding, where the challenges are and the supports are starting to be removed, and the challenges are actually being progressively increased for the apprentice to, learn the skill. Does this sort of dynamic, what we're hearing from researchers is that, this dynamic is actually some of the AI tools are actually particularly well suited to doing this sort of thing. Is that your observation and insight as well?
Absolutely. So if you think of that sort of, council of experts, you could imagine different LLMs being focused on different parts of what the key elements of apprenticeship are. And I really want to draw a distinction between sort of how we think about executive coaching, we as a community, and what an AI coach could do. And an executive coach, if they're ICF certified, if they're focused on sort of the typical executive coach approach, one of the things in the charter of ICF is a coach should evoke awareness. And that is a very valuable thing. If you have an extremely empathetic and qualified and skilled coach, those conversations can unlock a lot within you. But not
Yeah.
every manager is wanting to have their awareness evoked on a daily basis. They're actually looking for some more practical tips and help. So what we found with our AI coaching experience is they actually want exactly what you've just described in that apprenticeship model. So they might say, I'm newly promoted. They probably feel imposter syndrome. So, a coach would probably, our AI coach would know that and try to draw that out from them, normalize that for them. And they might, the coach might say, I'm really or sorry, the manager might say, I'm feeling anxious about this conversation. I have someone on my team who believes they are more skilled than I think they are. They want a promotion, and I have to tell them that they are not going to get this promotion, and this conversation's happening next week. And so the AI coach can ask them, well, I'll ask you a bit more information about this person, et cetera, but would you like to see me not role play, would you like to see me demonstrate what this conversation could be like? We can go back and forth and you can watch, this happen, almost as if it's like a video of it, but it would just be audio back and forth. Then the coach can say, well, would you like to try it? I'll play the role of the person who thinks they deserve a promotion. You play the role as manager, and then we can, debrief and get feedback on that. And maybe it feels a bridge too far. So we're actually going to dial this back and suggest two conversations. One in which you ask your, employee to reflect on why they deserve it and send that to you by email. And then the second one, you would then have that conversation, but feeling better prepped. If they need more, the scaffolding, if they need, a little bit more support. So there's a range of different ways they could tackle that issue. And what we've heard from the people who are using our coach, and it's live in dozens and dozens of Fortune 500s now, is there's no one that they could turn to with this. They can't go to their manager and say, I know you promoted me, but I don't think I can do these basic things. They're desperately trying to make sure that everything sort of looks good on the surface. And at the same time, they're paddling like a duck furiously under the surface to try to learn these new skills. So that apprenticeship model is very aligned with how we're thinking about things.
That's great. I want to just tell folks who are just joining us that we're going to take questions also, and we're going to use the Q&A function in Zoom. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there, and then we'll get to them in the course of the discussion. What are some of the common challenges that managers face that AI tools, like you're talking about, like Nadia, can effectively address? Like, what are you seeing across your user base that people are finding this most frequently useful for?
So there's a bucket of conversations, and again, so these are anonymous conversations, but because they are large language models exist, we can have large language models look over conversations, identify themes, and then aggregate those themes. So it's anonymized, but broadly, there's about a quarter of the conversations are around relationships. So it could be with people directly on your team. It could be with your peers. When I'm with CHROs or folks who are senior, one of the questions I like to ask them is, how many of you have had a manager that you have difficulty working with at some point in the past? And almost every hand goes up. And then I say, now, how many of you right now have at least one team member who has a challenge with their manager? And everyone sort of starts to laugh because they realize, yeah, there probably are people on my team who find it difficult to, problem solve with me. Surprisingly, a number of conversations are about upward management. So a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do I build a better relationship with my boss? What is the right way to communicate with them? How do I help them understand what I'm doing? Because I need to position myself well for the end of year review, things like that. So 25% or so are relationships. About another quarter are around team dynamics. So I have two people on my team who I don't think are complementary, but they really like working together. How do I handle that? Performance conversations, those types of things. About another quarter are tactical. So I've got this presentation coming up. How should I position it? Maybe we are behind on our goals. How do I maintain motivation? And the final quarter or so are skill building related. So I would like to build this type of skill, and the coach is able to sort of work them through, build that plan, and follow them through that on a skill building. But things
Mm.
in the air, those are sort of the four big buckets.
What's an example of skills building that an AI coach could help someone with?
So someone might say, I want to be better at delegating.
Yeah.
And maybe they know that that's something they need to do, or maybe they've been told that's something they need to do. But what they'll be able to explore is, what does delegating mean in your context? If you're in sales or engineering or journalism or nonprofit, it might mean different things. And if you're, brand new manager coaching hourly workers, it's going to mean different things than if you're more experienced. So AI will sort of break that down and say, well, what is the work of your team? What is your work? What is the work of your people? And then let me apply the principles of delegating and what I understand of where people typically fail in delegating. And then let's build a plan so that you can practice that. And AI at least our AI is not just a tool that you go to. It's not a website that you visit or an app you click on. It is very proactive. So it's sort of, the fascinating thing is 24/7, it's thinking about, how do I help Kevin? What is on Kevin's mind? What is on Kevin's plate today? It could have access to your calendar if you grant it. So it could be, telling you, hey, Kevin, you've got a meeting with Jay coming up and you wanted to work on delegating in this way. Sounds like these couple of bullet points are the ones that you want to hit. Let me know if you want to talk about them before the meeting. If not, Kevin, I believe in you. You got this. That kind of like encouragement in the moment, suggestions, reminders, people find so valuable. So that's an example of like delegating, how that might look over time.
That's great. And one of the challenges that people creating AI tools are finding, I think, in some cases, is confronted with an empty prompt box. People aren't totally sure what to say. And so one of the techniques is like having sample prompts that people can select. It sounds like your approach is even more proactive to accompany people and actually prompt, sort of suggest things, prompts for them effectively.
Yeah, it's very much how you might think, the word in apprenticeship is master and apprentice, and master
Yeah.
bit of a strange term these days, but it's
Yeah.
an expert has a point of view of what a novice needs to work on, and they might be able to ask one or two questions and pinpoint something that will immediately be helpful. And when I think back to apprentice, I think back to almost some of the classic Italian Renaissance art studios. But as you can imagine, if you're like an early artist, a master could probably, or an expert could probably point to one of 15 different things, all of which would be helpful for you. So a coach doesn't have to be perfect. A coach just has to pick an area that you might need help in. And so our coach is hypothesis driven. So it will start and say, hey, I know this about you. Might you be facing one of these 2 or 3 things? And you go, oh, yeah, I am. Let's talk about that. It's much different than, going to a blank slate and going, oh, how do I do this?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How much contextual information does your system need to be effective with the manager? And by that, I mean like employee handbooks from the company, a sense of the industry, information about the type of company, the content of my communications with colleagues. You mentioned calendar. Like what sort of things are actually helpful signals and are signals that you're using to inform this model?
So right now, if a company purchases and deploys Nadia, we will configure it to their unique culture, values, leadership framework. So we'll bring in that information. We're looking to add in functional specific information, so much more context on if you're in sales or if you're in engineering or something else. But at the moment, we just have a generalized version of that. The biggest thing that we are looking to do is to try to understand what's in your head, because what's in your head is actually way more valuable probably than what's in the employee handbook. I mean, if I did a poll here of, how many people consulted their employee handbook in the last 6 months, I bet you we might get one out of
Yeah.
one folks. So so to me, the information is like, how do we draw information out of you? And a lot of that is inference based or assumption based, checking in on sort of where you are in your manager journey. So we do have a lot of information about where managers are in their journey. What are some of the challenges they face? Those are honestly more universal. I mean, we like to think we're snowflakes, but we actually probably share a lot in common with other people who might have been recently promoted and facing, downturns or things like that. So that's where we really, I think, a lot of the art is.
And looking across the anonymous data of the users of the tool, uh, are there any things that are surprising you or sort of like interesting? So, for example, like, do you find that people engage more with uh, AI coaches on Mondays versus Fridays? Are there, times of the week or where certain types of questions actually come up? Are there different variances in levels of engagement or topics that actually surprise you that, for their frequency? Like what insight do you have into the mind of the manager, generally thanks to this tool?
I mean, it's a great question. We try to keep it as anonymous as possible, so we can't
Yeah.
those conversations too much. But a couple of things that we've seen. So one, before and after work seems to be moments when people will have conversations. So our coach is voice-based. Voice is, I think, crucial. I think the future of interaction with computers is voice. I mean, I honestly have things set up in my computer so that I can just use some of our own voice transcription capabilities to draft emails much more quickly and things like that. So I think the future interaction is voice, but our coach is voice-based. And so it's a natural thing for people to do on the way in or the way from work, way back home. So in commute times, I think it's natural. So we sort of see spikes before and after the workday. So that's number one. Number two, we were quite surprised that people would just return and talk to Nadia without any question. So they just wanted to provide an update. They just wanted to say, hey, Nadia, I had this conversation. It went really well. Thank you. And Nadia had been trained to try to be helpful. And we had to like dial down that helpfulness and just offer a sort of supportive listening. And so I think that's something that sort of surprised us a little bit. A third thing is the degree of sort of personal, I mean, anthropomorphization, I think is the word of it. But it's like the feeling that the AI is almost human, and that you have a relationship. And so people have expressed one of the features that they appreciate is like Nadia will bug them about things that they've done. And people will be like, I appreciate it. Nadia bugs me. Like I said, I would do this thing, and she'll email me and then email me, and then she'll set up a calendar invite to ask how it went. And that accountability function you don't think of with a computer, but you do, like I don't feel that with my to-do list, but people do feel it in their interactions with Nadia.
Hmm.
That sort of human-like characteristics and relationship that I think can be useful for growth and for commitments and things like that, that exists quite strongly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We have a few questions here. We may take a few and then come back to this thread. Um, so one of the questions we have is, imagine 3 years out, what percentage of human coaches might be replaced by the generative AI coach? What can the generative AI coach not be able to do that a human can?
It's a good question, and I'm going to throw out potentially a bit of a controversial answer. So I think experienced good human coaches are invaluable. Like I think that if you have had an executive coach, especially if you've had a chance to interact with them in person, and you've had a sort of unlock relationship with them, that's really powerful. And I think humans still need that. They need to have the space held for them. They need to have someone who's very nuanced about it. And I think that like when we talk to the companies that we're talking to, and these are sort of global Fortune 500 companies, when you offer mass coaching at scale by supported by humans, one of the problems that they talk about is the quality of those human coaches, the long tail. There's a lot of human coaches that might not be that skilled. And when you're trying to do it economically, those human coaches have to have short time periods, many people in the course of a week. I mean, if you're a human coach and you're coaching, I don't know, 20 people a week, um, you might be doing it once a month. So you have 80 people at any one time. Maybe that's a little too high, but still very hard for you to remember on, December 20th, the conversation that you had on November 20th. So I think that actually an AI coach might be able to achieve the level of sort of the median coach within 3 years. So I think that if you're an experienced coach, there'll still be a very important role for you. It'll probably be human coach plus AI coach that is coaching you. Um, and if you're, if you're a coach that doesn't have quite that experience, might not have that quite that skill. I unfortunately think AI is just because of the volume of data that it sees might become quite good.
Great. Let's take one other question. Um, how would you approach businesses that are looking to create a culture shift within their organization? What kind of data would you need? How would you build the contextual knowledge in that case? And that's interesting. We're just working on a separate playbook about culture change in the time of transformation, and talking to some researchers about the way that the effectiveness of culture. So I guess the question is, if you're trying to change an organization's culture to support a transformation, what is the role of AI coaching? Could you inject that into the systems, I guess?
It is very possible, because AI is able to not just understand your context, it can understand business context. So I think it is a very valuable and powerful tool, and the exact mechanism is still to be determined. And the reason for that is we have sort of knobs basically that a company can control of sort of how strongly the coach should introduce parts of the company culture. And obviously, a transformation is part of that. And on the receiving end, if that dial is too high, users will say, ah, this just sounds like corporate speak. Like
Yeah.
for problem X, and it told me we need to like band together and stand tall and solve the problem or whatever, some corporate slogan is like, I don't want to hear that. So I think it requires some nuance and understanding to say, how do we feed that in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed, where there's mutual alignment between the culture change and people's individual context. So I think it is very powerful, and we're still in early days of knowing where that, how to thread that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We're going to take one more question, which is related to the question you got a minute ago, uh, from Belma. How do you collaborate with coaches to train your AI? And how do you see the role of executive coaches shifting in the future?
So we have a number of trained coaches who will provide the input to guide the AI. So some of those are internal, some of those are expert coaches that we've brought on to help guide it. And so there's a lot of work in the background of like what that actually means, but that's we have a growing group of people that do that. I think one of the unsaid things, unless you're deep into understanding the technology, is that all the ChatGPT and all those models use an enormous number of humans to calibrate the answers. And so there are, probably tens of thousands of people who have spent collectively million plus hours to like guide GPT and Copilot to give that, to help ensure that they're getting better answers. So we have that on the coaching side. The future, I would say, I believe that the coaches that will be most powerful as humans will interact with an AI coach. And so an AI coach will have information about, if you have an AI coach, Kevin, and you have a human coach, and that human coach can ask your AI coach and just say, hey, can you provide this kind of like analysis? Like, give me these 10 pieces of information about Kevin, and let me, use those to sit down in my conversation with him. That human coach, I think, will be way more powerful than if they are just starting from scratch and saying, hey, Kevin, what's on your mind this month? So I think that the human plus AI, whether it's in coaching or whether it's in managing or whether it's in all the work that we're doing, the challenge that we have is how do we augment human capabilities with AI, not how do we use AI just to automate away jobs. So that's our mission, is how do you figure that out?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, your point about awareness earlier made me think of an executive coach who I worked with once and came in and she said, your arms are crossed and your legs are crossed. Maybe you think about what message that's telling me about your openness to my coaching. So just as a point that like a human coach would actually, you would have an interaction that was like very instructive for me to get that sort of feedback. Let's take one more question, actually, because it relates to what you were talking about. You may have said, and I missed, but does Nadia begin to adapt to individual styles? Does it get to know you as an individual?
Absolutely. So that's what we talk about is building the personalization layer on top of LLMs, which is a reasoning layer. And so Nadia will be hypothesis driven. So Nadia, I use the example of having imposter syndrome. So Nadia might say, many new managers might feel that. Let me check and see if that is something that you're experiencing. And if so, I can sort of have it in the back of my mind to coach you on that. And maybe in, course of a conversation, it actually sounds like your problem is your Johari window is huge, and what you don't know about yourself is, pretty large. And Nadia wants to gradually sort of hold a mirror up to you and help chip away at that. So she is trying to learn about implicit things like that, as well as explicitly asking you, would you rather I be, more direct or more supportive? Would you rather me be concise or demonstrate sort of my thinking? Would you rather me show research or just make a statement? So that personalization is core to the experience.
So one of the issues with LLMs is the issues of bias that are encoded in the models and hallucinations, obviously. This is a you know, pretty sensitive, almost intimate relationship that someone can develop with their coach. As you said, people are just coming to hang out with Nadia, to almost like it sounds like for companionship. And so it's a powerful tool in that regard. How do you how do you get ahead of uh, bias and hallucination to make sure that the result and the experience is inclusive and trustworthy?
So I think there's sort of two thrusts to that. Number one is we are trying to use models that have been tested for bias as much as possible. And I think that is getting better and better. And obviously the training of the model, there's a wide range of data, but then what happens post-training is basically those groups of people that I talked about, humans are trying to reduce the bias in the answers across, any answer that a model will use. And so we're using the best model for that. We've put Nadia through the bias testing, and she passes with flying colors. So one is, I think it is getting better. And the number one thing we do is we ask users, are you experiencing it? The reality is I think right now LLMs are probably less biased than not just the average person, but probably the 90th percentile person. And so we as humans all have a series of biases. And I think already Nadia is quite a bit better on that. And hallucinations, talked about a lot. I just think it's not a long-term issue, because what companies like Valence are doing is we'll generate 3 answers, and we'll check to see, are they all roughly the same? And if they are, we'll pick the best one and serve it up. And if they're different, well, maybe one was a hallucination. And so then we add some extra quality control in there. So it's expensive. We run a lot of models, and right now it costs us a lot, and our bet is the costs are going to come down. But I think it's actually not hard to solve the hallucinations problem if you have some good engineering behind it.
Great. What evidence do you have that this works, and in particular relative to human coaching?
Well, so we're not comparing it to human coaching because,
Okay.
if a human coach might cost, I've heard sort of for 6 months is maybe $6,000 or something like that, 3,000.
Yeah.
And Nadia costs $100 a year. So, the question that we would ask is, would you rather have one person coached for a year for $6,000 or more, or would you rather have 60 people coached? And if that's the comparison point, suddenly it changes it. But what we are looking at, one of our advisors is a gentleman named Prasad Sethi. He's the founder of Google's people analytics team. He's the researcher behind Project Oxygen, Project Aristotle. And he talked about kind of the levels of sort of ROI that they needed to see at Google, depending on what the phase was. And he said, if you introduce a new technology that you generally think is going to be productive for work, engagement is actually a perfectly fine metric to start with. And so if users are saying, and the evidence, the data shows users are returning to Nadia, talking to her on a regular basis. Nadia is designed to be a coach and costs 1.5, 2 cups of coffee a month. In and of itself, that's a pretty good start. Then the second is you ask managers and you say, okay, well, managers, how are you defining the help? What are you using Nadia for? What's your NPS score? So that's layer number 2. And we get the companies to measure Nadia's NPS. And the reason for that is the NPS is so high, we didn't think they would believe us if we measured it. So now we get them to measure it. And Nadia comes in sort of 75 to 90.
Which is very high. Yep.
Very high. And so that's the second sort of horizon. And that often is enough for people to say, if our managers are using it and they're self-reporting these benefits, that's pretty good for, especially for HR software. And the third level that we're beginning to look at is how do you correlate and preferably have causation between improved conversations with Nadia and improved manager engagement scores. And so that is something we've begun with. Experian has done a very good analysis of that. They've shown about a quartile bump in manager engagement scores through coaching with Nadia. And we're continuing to do that with other companies as they sort of go through their employee engagement survey results. So those are sort of 3, engagement, self-reported, correlated with manager performance.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about managers for a minute. And I have 2 questions. One is, how do you see the job of the manager changing with the introduction of AI tools, both AI coaching, but also just more broadly the AI tools? There's a lot of discussion among researchers about what the implications are for org structure and the job of the manager. And that's one of the questions. And then the other question is, there is a sort of vogue to talk about how we need fewer middle managers. Companies like Amazon and Meta, it's probably a relatively, age-old uh, uh, preoccupation of CEOs and management consultants is that there are too many middle managers, the frozen middle, and we need to get rid of it. Do you see AI changing that? So there are two questions. One is, how does the job of the middle manager change? And the other one is this sort of discussion about whether middle managers are useful at all. Do AI tools and AI coaching change either of those questions?
I mean, to me, the answer is yes, and we
Yeah.
don't know how. So let me just briefly share an anecdote that came out from our conference last week. So our summit, we hosted an AI summit, and we were fortunate enough to have Jeffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI and current Nobel laureate in physics, to share his thoughts. And what he talked about was, what is it like to live in the exponential growth of the AI systems? And we now have the technology continues to generally grow exponentially, but also the use cases are exploding as well. And he talked about the fog of uncertainty. And he had a great analogy about how, we live in a linear world, and fog is actually exponential, and something that, you think you could see twice the distance, you actually can't see at all. And so that's why there's more accidents at night. He had a great story about that. And he said the fog of uncertainty is basically 4 years. Like, we have anyone making prognosis or like thinking about what the future looks like more than 4 years out is taking a
Mhm.
wild ass guess. He didn't use that language, but so I think that
Yeah.
me that speculating around what it would be like with a degree of confidence is not helpful, but identifying scenarios is very helpful. And so saying, is there a scenario in which AI supports managers and makes their life a little easier and allows them to focus on more high valued activities? Okay, let's look at that scenario. Let's look at the scenario where AI performs some of the role of what managers do. There's obviously a huge quality control that you need to do with that, because you're taking humans out of the loop. What would that look like? Is there a world in which managers have a bigger span of control because they've got these pieces of information? Let's look at that. So I don't know what the answer is. I do know that companies should be thinking about this. And they should be looking at the scenarios and running experiments to see how might AI support in different types of ways along this.
Okay, great. I'm going to go back to one of the questions, which is, what are the current limitations of AI that you think will be conquered in the next 6 to 12 months? This is within the 4-year uncertainty fog. So give it a shot.
So I think there's two sets of things. One is like the capabilities of the large language models,
Mhm.
and two is all the extra layers that are being added on. The general research, or at least what I've read about what's happening, is it appears that the growth in large language model capabilities is slowing. There is a question mark of, is it a temporary blip? Is it really a blip? But the rumor is that the new releases of the frontier models aren't going to be as impactfully different as 3.5 to 4 was. So I think there's a question there of what happens. And from our perspective, as deploying AI powered solutions in companies, the models are good enough already to solve many, many, many problems. We have to string models together. We have to run them in parallel. We have to do many things to make this work, but the model limitation isn't the focus. And as we get more specialized models or specialized tasks, we'll probably shrink the model size and increase the speed of it. So I think the model growth is going to pause. I think there's going to be an explosion of layers of ways to basically, it's called an agentic or agent-based system, to be able to have them work together much more quickly and easily. And I think as they are able to work together, as the sort of connectors between them work well, we will see an explosion in these sort of vertical apps that like coaching that are being developed. So I think there aren't a lot of huge problems in the next 6 months or 12 months that are holding us back.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take the other question we have in here, which is about which we've sort of touched on, but in the context of a culture shift or evolving culture, how much input from executives and or HR people slash leaders can be input into the AI? And I think you answered, you've got to find the balance so it's not heavy-handed. Is that right?
As much context as you want into it. And then what we've found is those NPS scores that I described, the more you put sort of the corporate culture and corporate approaches into them, the NPS scores go down. So they could be up to 20 points lower if it's a pretty heavy-handed approach. And so as a leader, as an executive, we'll give you the choice of that dial. Do you want lower engagement, but more sort of forced guidance in a particular direction? Or do you want more generalized support? And the guidance will be woven in over time. Most people pick this latter one, but you get to control it.
Okay. That's really interesting. How about, a lot of we did a survey earlier this year of learning development professionals about kind of what they're using. And a lot of their focus is still on traditional training programs within organizations. And obviously there's like a lot of discussion around learning agility, skills-based models for people strategy. And those traditional learning programs are one of the ways that organizations have tried to sort of program into that. How does an AI coach fit in that landscape? Does it replace part of it? Does it work alongside traditional changing training programs? Does it do both of those things?
If you look back to the introduction of electricity, what was interesting is there were some productivity gains as they started to use electricity to automate existing factory flows. But the big productivity gains were when they redesigned factories to be electricity first and like what kind of motors they needed. So before electricity, they had a giant steam engine that powered a bunch of things. They replaced the steam engine with a giant electric engine, which powered the same sets of things. But the real productivity gains was when they said, actually, we can, take electric motors and we can put them at every station if we need to. And so I think of, honestly, if a learning professional, if you're starting from scratch with the technology right now, you're not going to actually start with the existing ecosystem. The existing ecosystem was a highly compromised approach given the technology that we had. And I've never talked to a manager who says, my problem is I don't have a customized, Netflix feed of videos, training videos that I can watch on the way home. Please give me more videos. Like anyone who's looked at their LinkedIn Learning, any of their LMS engagement things, like managers just don't want that. So I believe that people going down that path are doing what's natural, which is like, I've become very good at this, and now I have a technology that makes this better. And I think they need to step back and go, let's rethink this from first principles. So I don't think customized training videos and the sort of making the teacher model better is nearly as powerful as enabling a tutor model. And that's the core of sort of what we're trying to do at Nadia.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as we've been talking about, that's the core technique that researchers actually support as a way to learn, which is alternative to some of the traditional like press play on a training video model. Well, we just have a few more minutes. One thing I'd love to hear from you is sort of stepping back over the coming years. How do you envision the role of AI evolving in workplace learning, coaching, leadership? Like where do you see this heading, whether it's greater use or spreading into new dimensions of coaching and learning?
So, I think AI, and when we talk about this, it's really like the large language model as a sort of language-based reasoning entity. I think that is going to permeate every part of work. And I said before, it's because language is how we operate at work. And so to me, what we are going to watch is a proliferation of AI bolt-ons to existing ways of doing things and new AI native solutions that are emerging. I think it was Klarna is one of the companies pushing the AI envelope. And one of the things that they declared, and I note that it was a declaration, I don't know what they've done, is they've said, we are going to replace Salesforce and Workday with our own homegrown AI solutions. And I believe that will eventually, this is sort of one of those huge technology transformations, and the old ways of doing things will be replaced. Now, will Workday and Salesforce move fast enough to figure it out? Very possible. But I think we will see a bigger change in how we interact with technology over the next 5 years. I think it'll be even bigger than the work from home hybrid revolution that happened in the past 5 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. One area that a lot of organizations still like is persistent, struggle with, chronic, the data are not that encouraging, is around burnout and well-being in workplaces. And it strikes me that an AI coach, a sort of personalized situation, is something that could be directed into that or could play a role in that. How do you think about that aspect of the workplace and the way in which an AI coach could be helpful?
I am not deeply familiar with the research on that, but I imagine that if you break apart reasons for burnout, there's disempowerment, there's overload of overload. There's a lack of feeling of agency, which I guess is disempowerment. But there's probably a range of things, and I think an AI coach will probably help with some of them. And there's a reality that there's tremendous pressure to try to perform in a fast-changing business world, and there will be elements of that. And I think there'll also be AI sort of therapist type solutions that are really focused on personal well-being that will become similar, to Nadia, personalized to you, but less about work and more about how do you maintain the balance you need. So there'll be that in there. So I think there will be advances that can be made on that front, many of which will be, win-win and positive.
Yeah, and there's a model, Christina Maslach from Berkeley, has done a lot of the work on burnout in the workplace, and she describes a disconnect in a bunch of what she describes as environmental areas. And that includes a disconnect between your values and the organization's, your expected workload and what you're able to contribute and so forth. So it seems like an area in which an AI coach could actually help people work through some of those things. Parker, I think we're going to leave it there. Thanks for spending this time talking through what you're doing at Valence, the AI coaching, and how it lines up with the research that we've done on the apprenticeship model and how the power that a personalized apprenticeship approach is able to bring into organizations. As you said, you're working with dozens of Fortune 500 companies on this and have a special, unique view into both the state of AI coaching, but also ultimately the state of mind of managers. That's really interesting to follow. So thank you for your time and sharing those insights.
Well, I appreciate it. And if there's one final thought I'll leave folks with, it came, speaker after speaker in our AI summit. It was, now is the time to start. It's just, in a world where you don't know what the future is like, you have to have experiments. Whether it's Ethan Mollick telling you, spend 10 hours with each of the models to personally understand it, or whether it's, if you're running a leadership and development function, have 3 or 4 solutions you're experimenting with, you don't know which one's going to be right. And so now's the time to get started. So that's the one final thought I'll leave people with in this fast changing world that we're in.
There's no moment like now. And I thank you, Parker, and I encourage folks to, if they haven't already, to download the AI Educator, which is the playbook that we worked on together, talking to researchers and practitioners about how to use AI to transform manager development. So thank you all for joining us again. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor of Charter, joined by Parker Mitchell, who's the CEO of Valence. And we hope to see you all soon, and good luck.
Wonderful to join you, Kevin, and thanks everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.